Today we start with our fourth video in the series where Doreen and Jim are going to talk to you a little bit about the 1967 canoe race and explain some of the history and how it went down during that race. So, take it away, Jim and Doreen.
Hi there. Within the last three videos of this series, we've been talking about the fur trade, the 1967 Centennial Canoe Race, and the role of the canoe in Canada's history. The Centennial voyageurs and other historically minded paddlers have made a point of reenacting the 1967 canoe race, which celebrated our early fur trade history. They have gathered in brigades and or races on the old fur trade routes in 26-foot voyageur canoes. Some of the more notable of these events were
1992, a gathering of the Centennial voyageurs to celebrate Canada's 125th with a sprint race and the construction of the Alberta Centennial Canoe Pavilion at the Rocky Mountain House historical site.
In 1999, Rocky Mountain House Centennial Voyageurs Rendezvous was a celebration of the Acton House's 200th anniversary.
2000, a Millennium Brigade from Rocky Mountain House, Alberta to Flin Flon, Manitoba.
And in 2004, they gathered for a brigade on the Churchill River.
2005, A, Rupert's Land Brigade to take the Rent to the Queen from Rocky Mountain House historic site to Fort Edmonton, Alberta.
And B, in 2005, was the Saskatchewan Centennial Canoe Quest, which was a race of 33 canoe, 26-foot canoes across Saskatchewan from La Loche to Cumberland House on the old historic Churchill River for Saskatchewan's centennial.
2006, a 200-mile canoe trip to Golden, BC.
And in 2008, a brigade of canoes from Rocky Mountain House, right here where we are, to Thunder Bay, Ontario.
2017, the Rupert's Land Express Canoe Race from Rocky Mountain House, Alberta to the Pas, Manitoba. A celebration of Canada's 150th to remember our combined fur trade and First Nations history and following the fur trade route. Well, part of it. There have been other such events, but the important thing is that our modern day voyageurs seized the opportunity to celebrate our Canadian fur trade history and enjoyed traveling on our marvelous Canadian rivers in much the same way as has been done throughout our Canadian history.
Well, we mentioned on occasion the voyageurs have paddled the Rent to the Queen. What on earth does that mean? This is a very interesting part of Canada's history and something the Centennial voyageurs thought very important. It all goes back to the year 1670 when exploration of Canada was all very new. King Charles II of England granted his cousin, Prince Rupert, a charter for exploration, fur trading, mining, and commerce in all the lands, bays, straits, sounds, rivers, and creeks draining into Hudson Bay. So we're talking about this area right here. This area then was called Rupert's Land.
Prince Rupert then formed a company of investors which they called the Hudson's Bay Company to carry out the terms of the charter, which required the company to administer all trade and commerce and to govern the inhabitants of Rupert's Land. Further exploration by canoe and on foot by such great explorers as Radisson and Grozier, David Thompson, Alexander Mackenzie, Simon Fraser, Henry Kelsey, Pierre La Vérendrye, and many others, extended the sovereignty of the charter to include the lands and waters draining to the Arctic and to the Pacific. These explorers were honored by the Centennial voyageurs who named their canoes after them. The charter is the basis for most of the treaties that form the present-day boundaries of Canada. An unusual part of the charter required that a rent of 2 elk hides and 2 black beaver pelts be paid to King Charles II and any of his heirs or successors annually whenever they visited Rupert's Land.
Right, the rent, believe it or not, has been paid 5 times in recent history and was paid to Queen Elizabeth II in 1959, 1970, And again in 2005 when the Centennial Voyageurs paddled the Rent in a brigade from Rocky Mountain House to Edmonton. Jim was along on that one, and presented it to Lieutenant Governor Kwong in a ceremony at Fort Edmonton the day Queen Elizabeth arrived in Edmonton for a visit. The Rent is now housed in the Royal Museum in Edmonton, and one elk hide is in the museum in Rocky Mountain House. In 1869, the Government of Canada negotiated the Deed of Surrender with the Hudson's Bay Company for the charter and the lands held by it for the grand sum of 300,000 English pounds, or about $1 million. So Canada was worth $1 million basically. In 1870, Rupert's Land was officially transferred to Canada. As an example of the excitement of these brigades we were talking about and these races, Jim will now tell you about being a part of the Alberta team in the 2005 Centennial Canoe Quest from Lac La Roche to Cumberland House in Saskatchewan in a 3-week marathon race. Jim.
Okay, about the Saskatchewan Centennial Canoe Quest. It was called a quest for a good reason, because it was a race and a quest. It was exciting, it was epic, it was grueling. We paddled 1,118 kilometers or 633 miles. It required big lakes, big rapids, super teamwork, big 6-person 26-foot canoes, and we paddled 2 river systems. We paddled across Saskatchewan on the Churchill, one of the most beautiful fresh clear water rivers left in the world, and the Sturgeon Weir. Old canoe routes that have been inhabited by people for about 5,000 years. And we paddled from La Loche to Cumberland House. The big thing about the race was there were 30 teams, and unusual numbers. That meant Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and Scotland were represented. Yes, a team from Scotland entered the race. We had 198 paddlers, 200 participants, and this was the country of the men of the North, les hommes du Nord. So on a bigger map of Saskatchewan, it was this far north of Saskatchewan that most people don't know about. If you look at a road map, all the roads are down here. This is arable land, and this is all Canadian Shield. And this race or quest ran through the bottom of the Shield, where there are still many native settlements along the way, and so every settlement celebrated the Centennial as we got to it. This was very unusual because it united the people from La Loche, Isle of La Crosse, Pine House Lake, Cumberland House, Scotland. Scotland had a big part in the voyageur trade, fur trade, because they had fur traders all the way across here from Scotland that ran the fur trading posts. I've marked it out on this map. So, La Loche down to Diller. Big party. Everybody gathered, everybody celebrated. Then we paddled to Buffalo Narrows. Again, the same thing. Isle of La Crosse, and this goes from a Dene community to a Métis community to a Métis community, and all of a sudden up to another Dene community. This was really special. They slaughtered a moose on site as we paddled into shore, and then they cooked it as we watched, and then we ate it. This is so remote that, as you can see, there are still no roads up into this country. So when we paddled from Padonac to Knee Lake, we had to carry food, clothing, and shelter with us. And then when we arrived at Pine House, there is now a road at Pine House, and this continued all through the quest, where we got to places where we had to carry food, clothing, and shelter, camp overnight, paddle the next day, and all of our timers and all of our watchers and all of our officials all had to be with us. The other good thing that was, to me, is marvelous, because you see, I was born here in Pierceland, Saskatchewan, on the Churchill River. This is part of my cultural heritage. I grew up in a log cabin, and across the street, Native people lived. And some people in my life had curly hair, and some people had straight hair. Some people had blue eyes, some people had brown eyes. And I carry that with me wherever I go amongst Native people, and it's very apparent, I guess, because I'm always made welcome whenever I meet Native people. I talked to all of these people, made friends with all of these folks. I asked them, why did you join in this? Because these people had all forgotten how to paddle. As soon as an aluminum boat with a motor came into the country, back went the paddles into the bush, back went the canoes under the under the trapper's cabin, and they rotted there. You can find them today. But they rediscovered paddling, and there were teams with mixed Native ladies, men who just learned to paddle again for this race. There was a team from so far north up at this lake up here, Hatchet Lake. Hatchet Lake is so far north there still isn't a road into there. When they arrived, they still didn't know how to paddle their canoe. They didn't know you should have one in the front and one in the back. They sat side by side in the middle. But they quickly learned. They placed in the top 10 by the time they finished. And in fact, the team from Hatchet Lake just finished winning the big race from here down to the Pas, Manitoba. It changed the whole face of these people across here, because all of a sudden they're interacting with each other. Places that never had anything to do with each other now interact on a very big level. Cumberland House here is marvelous because the best paddlers in the world come from there. They still come from there. How they ever lost to Hatchet Lake, I don't know. It must have been a bitter blow. But in our race, there were 3 teams from Cumberland House. And we used to invite them to our camp and say, teach us how to paddle the way you paddle. Because after half an hour on a 5-hour day, they'd be out of sight. They'd be out of sight every day after half an hour. They were that much better than us. And we had to learn to paddle for 8 hours without stopping, for 8 hours grabbing a bite, for 8 hours with bathroom breaks, all in the canoe. Everybody had to do that. I still remember the team from Scotland coming to shore, and the ladies from the Scottish team jumping out of their boat saying, "I peed in the boat, I peed in the boat," because they didn't think they could do it. It was too embarrassing, but everybody had to learn to do that. The end of the race was absolutely epic. We couldn't get to Cumberland House because it was flooded out, so we had to stop early. But again, the winners of the race were from this area around here at Flin Flon, where the best paddlers in the world come from. In closing, I would like to say I'm wearing my special vest today. That it was something that changed my life, and I met people that I'll never forget, and that will be my friends for the rest of my life.
We're so lucky that Canadian rivers flow, for the most part, from west to east or east to west. And they provide then a route right across our great nation. What an amazing way to explore Canada and enjoy a most unique wilderness adventure. It's not necessary to have a 26-foot canoe or to use all of the waterways across Canada to discover the amazing way to be part of nature, get some exercise, and become one with our natural history. As that early explorer said, there's no life like the life of a voyageur. We find that traveling in Canadian waterways restores part of our soul, gets us in tune with nature, even when it's cloudy and going to threaten rain like right now, and gets us in tune with our spirits, connects with all of nature and its marvelous mysteries, like the call of the wild, the call of the loon in the evening, the splash of a beaver tail, and the taste of a northern pike, or the smell of the conifers, and the beauty of the bushes and flowers along the river. The wonders of the northern lights and other delights too numerous to mention.
So before I forget, don't omit going on the web to find out all sorts of things about canoeing. Google the Saskatchewan Canadian Canoe Quest. Google the 1967 race. Google canoeing. Google that Canadian icon Bill Mason. Wonderful stuff. In the next video we'll tell you some of our personal experiences paddling on Canadian waterways, with the hope that it will encourage you to take some lessons, pick up a paddle, Google paddling, and become a modern-day voyageur.